Volodymyr Zelensky has a victory plan, and he's going to share it with U.S. President Joe Biden. Apparently, that's going to happen just days from now when Zelensky comes to the United States to make a speech before the United Nations General Assembly. He'll do that out, I believe it's on the 24th of September. Biden will speak the next day, actually. Or I think that's actually vice versa. First it's Biden, and then Zelensky will follow on after that. And a part of that is he's going to talk about his victory plan. Now, we discussed a little bit about this victory plan in the past, but we're getting some more information, so we want to bring it to you. And to try and unpack a lot of this stuff and try to, get fiction from reality, we have Matthew Ho, friend of the show, former Marine combat vet, and, of course, the associate director of the Eisenhower Media Network. Matt, as always, welcome back.
Thanks, Danny. Happy to be back.
And so let's just jump right into it here. So Zelensky was coming out, and I believe we have that one picture there where from the Kiev Post where Zelensky is saying he's going to bring his victory plan to Biden as he prepares new aid package. Apparently, the United States concurrently is also talking about a very large additional aid package, somewhere around $700 million, I believe, will be announced also within days, possibly around the same time of this victory package here. But, the terms always kind of matter, or at least they're supposed to. And you would think when you hear the term victory plan that that's supposed to mean victory and that you will succeed and you'll win in a war. And Zelensky has kind of given a bunch of different changing definitions really since this first came out. And, I just wonder if, as I'm sure you've been tracking a lot of this with this victory plan, what is your just kind of 30,000 foot view of this whole concept?
I feel like I'm reliving some of the worst experiences of my life, in the sense that when I was at the State Department on the Iraq desk in 2005, I helped put together what was called the U.S. Victory Plan for Iraq. It was actually called the USV, United States Victory in Iraq. And yeah, it was exactly as everyone who's sitting back watching and listening to us right now would expect. It was just complete nonsense. It was so nonsensical, and you could see how it was just totally for propaganda value, because when Lieutenant General Vines, who at that point was the Corps commander, so the commander of all ground forces in Iraq, he was what was called MNCI, Multinational Corps Iraq. He was the 3-star in charge of that. When General Vines was asked about this plan for victory that was coming out of Washington, D.C., he said he'd never heard of it. I mean, so that's how detached from reality it was, that the Corps commander didn't even know what our plan was. So, I mean, I feel like I have a pretty heavy case of deja vu here. I'll also say, Danny, I said this to Judge Knapp last week, but, I'd include you in this group as well. Those of us who were in Iraq and Afghanistan, particularly at multiple levels, interacting with the Iraqis or the Afghans, or maybe back here working on policy in DC, we're experts at false hope, right? We are absolutely, you cannot get anyone more familiar, more authoritative, and with better experience than Iraq and Afghan veterans when it comes to this notion of false hope. So seeing this coming next week, I feel like it's 20 years ago, man. Like we've seen this movie before. We know how it ends. And I guess we're going to talk about this. It's as light in details and as much established fantasy and fabulism and just false hope as you would expect it would be.
And can I just go ahead just to add in the other half of that horrible equation from a U.S. past is remember the famous surge of Obama in 2010 and 11, et cetera, where first Stan McChrystal came in with his famous government in a box. They were going to just go in and change the dynamics there, and we were going to come in and we were going to win this war, or General Allen saying this is victory. This is what winning looks like. And it didn't quite work out that way, but I get the same kind of vibes here as you're talking about.
I remember writing something for the Huffington Post in 2010, or maybe, I guess it was 2010, where I quoted every commanding general we'd had in Afghanistan up until that time, who was basically trumpeting the same triumphant claim of success as his predecessor had. Right. I mean, and with regards to the surge, for people who don't know you or I well, I became public for resigning because I said for my post in Afghanistan, because I said this, this surge, this escalation of the war is not going to work. And then 2 years later, you became a very public and prominent whistleblower at great risk to your career and your future by going to Congress and saying, the generals who are saying that this escalation, this surge has worked, they're lying to you. And here's all the details. Here's all the data you need off of the DoD computers that prove it. Right. So I think you and I, in those bookend moments, we understand just how much this false hope that's given to others is just sheer mendacity. And they know they're lying. But the grift is good. The racket is good. They need this for their own individual or institutional advancement or legacy. So it's. I had a conversation with, I believe it was Alyssa Rubin. There's another Rubin as well, and I always mix them up. But both of them wrote for the New York Times at some point. But one of them did a lot of work with Afghanistan. She had a big cover story in Time magazine about the Korengal Valley in early 2009. It's titled "The Valley of Death." I believe she's the one who wrote that. But then later on, she went and did a big high profile interview of Bob Gates, who was the Secretary of Defense then, for the New Yorker or New York Times magazine, but a big thing. And she spent like 2 weeks with him. And I spoke to her after it was published, and she said, I remember we were in an elevator together, and she said, what's really disturbing to me is that I spent all that time with Bob Gates, and the only thing that I could really believe about why he supported the escalation in Afghanistan was because he wanted the Pentagon, he wanted the military to get a chance for victory. Because after Iraq, no one was going to give the Pentagon any credit for anything, but here was their chance to get credit, right? Here's their chance to win. And she said she was really disturbed by how that's what she believed was Gates's rationale for supporting escalation in Afghanistan, was for that institutional credit, for the institutional benefit of the Pentagon and the U.S. military, not because it had any chance of success, certainly not because it wasn't in the best interest of the United States.
And I want to kind of go down that path there because I think that is very relevant to what we're talking about here. Because you had Gates and you had already nailed it down when you're the one that really instructed me initially that there wasn't a path to victory. But here he is, the Secretary of Defense, saying, I want to get a victory for whatever reasons, to undo the stuff from Iraq War. It doesn't matter what you want if the fundamentals aren't there that will enable it. But that didn't stop anybody from going forward. And I think we see some similar things here. Now, I want to play, first of all, we talk about definitions being important. Here's what Zelensky said. I think it was just this past weekend. Yeah, it was this past weekend. I was talking to Fareed Zakaria, and he's explaining what victory means when he uses the term now.
Yes, I will speak with him how to strengthen ours before peace summit, to be in a strong position, because diplomatic decisions or solutions, they are good when you are strong. Otherwise, Putin will not even, take place in it. And I think otherwise they will be not interested in any kind of circumstances how they can stop the war. That's why I have the plan. Yes, victorious plan, because for us it's victory, to be very strong and be ready for the strong diplomacy.
What is so bizarre about that, Matt, is he's talking that they want to get strong and they want to, and you're going to see in a minute here where he's talking about he wants to hurt Russia to make them want to come to the negotiating table. What planet has he been on? Russia's been talking about negotiations from before the war and all the way through it. They've been offering progressively worse opportunities. But what mentality would think that now, after all these times you've bypassed and rejected negotiations, that suddenly Putin is going to have a different negotiation to your advantage because you hurt them a little? I don't understand the logic there.
Yeah, it makes no sense, right? And I think everyone you can see this, just in anything in your own lives and business dealings and whatever. If somebody offers you terms and you refuse those terms, and particularly in a hostile manner, right? Why do you expect that later on you're going to receive the same terms as before when you are in a worse state and they are in a better state? And plus your rebuffs, your violent dismissal of their offers, right? As well as just lying about it. How does anyone think that you're going to have the same opportunities later that you have now? But this has been a core component of American military policy, our militarized foreign policy, for decades. This victory narrative that we always have to be pursuing victory, and that there is nothing, no option. There are no other options. Certainly diplomacy is never an option until it's too late. I mean, certainly you had that, and oftentimes it comes down to the political survival of the party that's in power is what's at stake here. And that's what happened, say, in the Iraq War, where George W. Bush finally negotiates to get the United States out of Iraq in 2011, but he negotiates that in 2008 because the Republicans were hoping that would get Iraq off of the presidential campaign, would make it not an issue. And of course, it was a huge issue. It was the biggest issue in 2008. Right. And so, I mean, but my belief, the only reason the Bush administration actually negotiated that status forces agreement and got it in the summer of 08 was because they had to get it out, And so oftentimes, even the reasons why you come to negotiate have got nothing to do with the reality of the circumstances, particularly if it's others who are suffering in this case. And so I think this delusion that somehow they're going to be in a place where they can negotiate and get what they want when they have just rebuffed it and violently dismissed it, lied about it. Again, it's just delusional. But this, lines up. Remember about a year ago, Danny, there was that Time magazine cover story on Volodymyr Zelensky. And, he was quoted, the author of that piece, quoted people on Zelensky's inner team as saying he was delusional and messianic.
Right.
And I mean, we're seeing that all kind of play out now, where he's going to make this grand appearance in New York. He's going to present this victory plan to the world. And everything, thanks, Gary, everything is going to fall in place after that. He's playing the greatest role of his life, right? He probably has that Person of the Year Time magazine, in his office, maybe he's got in his bedroom, first thing he sees when he wakes up or something like that. But yeah, I mean, certainly the idea that there's a pathway here that is in any way, shape, or form similar to what could have been achieved in 2021, in early 2022, even in 2023, because we know the Russians were attempting to negotiate all through 2023. They were attempting to negotiate. They made offers through this year. And I mean, and even right before the Kursk offensive.
Right, in June 14th, to be specific. Well,
yeah. I mean, so you've had this well-documented reporting by mainstream American press, that lays out that the Russians have been negotiating. They won't say that in their current articles. It's always curious how they refuse to reflect upon
remember
what they wrote. But I mean, it's just madness.
Well, listen, I'm glad you brought up the Gates issue, what he had said before. I actually had forgotten about that, but it, again, just shows how we have this same repeating pattern. Now, speaking of delusion, Lindsey Graham. So we'll just get that off the table right now. So whatever follows is going to be that way because that's the nature of this gentleman. But it's important to show here because he does reflect the thinking of many in Washington, and it does appear that he has some influence even over this current administration, which is really bizarre on its own count. But notice when he's going to say here, this is also from this past weekend. So it's very fresh. This is in light of all the things that have been going on of late with the losses in the East and the losses in the North, et cetera. And he's still talking about his own version of victory. And well, watch this first, and we'll come back on the back.
When it comes to how this thing wraps up, President Trump was pressed the other night about how to win this, what he considers, and he kept saying he just wants to end it. Listen, you've been to Ukraine more than I have. I was talking to Ukrainians this week, though, who say it cannot involve ceding territory to Putin that he took from them. That's not how they see this ending for many reasons. Do you talk to the president about what his plan is if he's reelected to end this thing?
Yeah, he's right to want to end the war in a way not to start a new war. The last person I would listen to about how to end the war is the Biden administration or the Obama team. In 2014, we had an end of the war in Ukraine. It led to another invasion. Here's what Trump will do. He will end the war in a way not to entice China to invade Taiwan. He will end the war in Ukraine in a way to prevent a third invasion. Biden has no plan to end this war that is effective. I am listening to Zelensky. He has a plan that's coming out in about a week. What we need here is an American president that can get Putin and Zelensky in a room to end this war, to make sure we don't have another war.
That's the equivalent, in my view, of saying I would like a triple cheeseburger with chili fries and cheese, a large Coke, and a shake, and I want to lose 5 pounds. What's the problem with that? That is so bizarre, even for Lindsey Graham, because he's on the one hand was just told that many people in Ukraine are saying that no negotiation can end with us giving up any territory, i.e., back to the 1991 borders, i.e., 4 full, oblasts that Russia now occupies, and they're taking more territory, that they're just going to somehow give it away because, I don't know, Donald Trump can sit there and talk to them both in a room and get them to agree to that. I mean, that is just as nonsensical as it gets.
Yeah, it sounds to me, too, in that interview, like Lindsey Graham got slapped up with a discipline stick by the Republican Party, by the Trump campaign, because certainly his willingness to present that Donald Trump would be able to negotiate a win here for everybody, a victory, is different than anything Graham has said over the last couple of years, how there can only be military victory. You can't have any negotiations, right? Any negotiations is betrayal. So it's interesting to watch even Lindsey Graham kind of get put in line. He tries to massage it. He tries to message it in a way so he's still remaining true to his worst warmongering beliefs. But yeah, interesting to see that. This idea that first also too, the anchor there, I'm sure the Ukrainians she spoke to were those propagandists in Washington, D.C. who are Ukrainian, but who you can ultimately trace their paycheck to the U.S. Treasury Department. That's I always found about whether the Iraq war, the Afghan war, this war, those who are strongest in their beliefs for the war continuing are often those nationals, those expats from those countries who are never going back there and who have paychecks that come from this war continuing, right? And interestingly, there are many Ukrainians, not a majority, but certainly a growing minority, high 30s, low 40%, depending upon the poll you look at over the last year, that are in favor of negotiation. And that is trending. It's continuing to trend, right? This idea, including Ukrainians who believe that land should be given up for peace. Not a lot, but it's a growing number. But you get back to it, though, is what's the pathway for any of this? I mean, what is the actual foundation upon which either we know that military victory is completely impossible unless you introduce a NATO army, right? And we've talked about this, like an army in the true sense of an army, like 3 to 5 corps of armored and mechanized infantry and all the supporting air and naval forces and missile forces and everything else, which would lead to World War III then. Right. Right. I mean, it's just impossible. I don't even know if the NATO has the ability to put together a force like that to actually conduct a war like that, right?
Yeah, that's a separate issue.
That's the whole, right? Could NATO do that, right?
I want to get back to this, or not to get back to, but continue going down this road. The reason why we're even having this episode today is because I want to show people, and we're starting to get to that now, that there's not a path to victory. There's not even a path to negotiated settlement to your advantage, the Ukraine side, but there's still this, I don't know if it's inability or unwillingness or maybe some combination of the both to recognize that, because they keep wanting to say, whether it's the people that Shannon Bream talked to there in Ukraine or this next fellow here I'm going to show you. This is a Ukrainian reporter, and you'll see he's clinging to this hope. And I believe from watching this that, unlike Lindsey Graham, I think he actually believes what he's saying, but it just shows you how really problematic this whole thing is, because you're believing on something that is not true. Watch this.
Difficult to underestimate and understate how important this is for Ukrainians, strategically and symbolically. It's something that the country, the leadership, and the people have been asking for since the very beginning of the full-scale war, to be able to defend itself and fight back against Russia without one hand tied behind their backs. And now, obviously, with increased frequency of Russian long-range attacks against Ukrainian cities and infrastructure, this plea has just gone louder and louder, and now Ukrainians are certainly crossing their fingers for the ability to fight properly back against Russia to be finally granted.
So now he's specifically talking about this desire this Zelensky keeps making to have long range weapons and the freedom to use them anywhere in Russia. And the belief is that if we use these long range weapons at the locations where the aircraft take off from, or some of the arms depots, or some of these other things further into Russia, that's going to eliminate their attacks on the Ukrainian cities. And he was specifically referring there to a bunch of the Russian airstrikes that are hitting all over the Ukraine. And by the way, Zelensky's going to talk about that in just a second. But first of all, I just want you to talk from a military perspective. Do you think that these missiles, if they're given permission, and for the moment, I don't want to talk about the Russian response, what it may be, but let's just look at militarily. If they get the permission to use these and they strike these military targets deeper in Russia, will that change the dynamic on the war?
No, not at all. I mean, it will make things more difficult for the Russians, right? It'll complicate things. They'll have to pull their forces farther back out of the range of those missiles, which makes all their operations more difficult, right? More logistically intensive, takes longer, et cetera, et cetera. You got to reconfigure your defense. I mean, all those things. Certainly the Russians would rather have it that these missiles aren't used, and it will cause them problems, but it's not going to change the war at all. It doesn't have, where is the knockout punch? Where is the strategic value in this? And of course, the argument maybe for the Ukrainians in terms of continuing the false hopes of this war, that just one more wonder weapon will get us the victory we need. There's going to be a chain reaction of events. These weapons are going to cause a collapse in the Russian military because we're able now to strike their fighter bases, so their fighters can't take part, which means they have to use their drones more. And then some new wonder weapons going to come in, and that's going to eliminate the drones. And then we'll be able to push on the ground forward, right? And, without fear of being hit by glide bombs or drones. And we're going to drive the Russians out of Ukraine. That's the type of false hope that is given to these people, and it's complete nonsense. It's complete bunk. There's no ability for any of that to happen. You're just going to see it's just going to be a continue. And what's the response from the Russians going to be, right?
Yeah. I want to touch on that secondly, but I have an odd person here to come and corroborate what you just said. Inadvertently. So here is Zelensky yesterday explaining how some of the attacks that he's had on his country here necessitate the need for these long-range missiles, but he doesn't realize he's actually exposing why it won't matter. Watch this.
Today, Russian forces also hit our Sumy and Donetsk regions with such bombs. In total, there are no fewer than 100 airstrikes of this kind every day. Just in the past 24 hours, 128 guided aerial bombs were used. The only way to counter this terror is with a systemic solution, and that solution is long-range capabilities, enabling us to destroy Russian military aircraft at their bases. This is an obvious, sensible decision. We have already explained to all our partners why Ukraine truly needs sufficient long-range capabilities. And every such Russian strike, every instance of Russian terror, like today's attacks on Kharkiv, on our Sumy and Donetsk regions, proves that long-range capabilities are necessary and the range must be sufficient.
Okay, so he just admitted that the Russians are firing up to 100, or as the case yesterday, 128 airstrikes throughout the country of Ukraine on a daily basis, or drone strikes, and yet it doesn't stop them from continuing to conduct operations. So by what logic would you say that doing the same thing to Russia would stop them and stop their forward progress?
Well, I don't know that much about the Russian aircraft, right? I couldn't tell you the operational ranges of the MiGs or the Sukhois, but they're similar to our operational ranges with our aircraft, and they have aerial refueling. And where did we for strikes in both Iraq, and Afghanistan? Where did our aircraft come from? They came from the UAE. They came from Turkey. They came off of carriers thousands of miles away, potentially. The B-52s came out of Diego Garcia. That's where the B-1s came out of as well, I believe, at Diego Garcia. So, the B-1s were always over us in Afghanistan, and they were either coming from the Gulf or they were coming from Diego Garcia. I can't remember which one. But it just shows that it doesn't matter. The Russians just pull their aircraft back. And if they have to put tankers up in the air to supply the ones that are dropping those glide bombs, so be it. What I would also point out to folks, and this is something that if I had a chance to sit with Zelensky, and depending upon what hat I had. If I was being paid to give him false hope, I could certainly make arguments what he could do. Go see the bankers on Wall Street while you're here in New York, like that type of thing, because they want their money. They're the ones who've been promised Reconstruction, kind of similar to Wilson getting into World War I, because the bankers said, hey, Wilson, if you don't send an American army over there, we're not going to get our money back from the British and the French. Right. I mean, so different dynamic here where it's not that they've loaned money, but they've been promised the Reconstruction, as well as all the promise of all those tens of billions of dollars to contractors, the weapons contractors. So in addition to going to see BlackRock and Goldman Sachs and State Street and whoever, go see Raytheon and Lockheed and General Dynamics and say, hey, if you guys want your money, you better stick with us. Right. Exactly. Thanks, Gary. It's a great photo, and then, but the other argument to pop the bubble would be like, Mr. President Zelensky, you've asked for how many Patriot systems? A dozen, I think, maybe 15. Do you know how many the United States has? We've got like 90. Why can't we give you more? Why aren't we willing to give you more? Didn't you see what we did for Israel in sense of putting all kinds of stuff in the sky to defend them? We were shooting stuff down over the Gulf. We were shooting stuff down over Iraq, over Jordan, Saudi Arabia. We were happy. We bragged about it. We gave people medals for that. The Democrats won't stop talking about it. And yet we won't do the same for you. And then, of course, the whole thing, my favorite one is the tanks. We had to basically, this better than I, Danny, we rebuild M1s to give them one, take ones out of storage someplace and rebuild them. It took us 6-8 months to get them over there. 30 of them or something like that.
Yeah, 31.
Meanwhile, what happened a couple of years ago? The Marine Corps got rid of its M1A2s. There's about 300 M1A2s that the Marine Corps gave up just a few years ago that are sitting someplace. Why didn't we give you those, Mr. Zelensky? What's going on here? Why don't you understand that we are just going to provide you with false hope? Just like that young man, that reporter in Donetsk was talking about. We just need this, that. You know why he believes that? Because we promised him that. We told him that we're just as Boris Johnson showed up in April of 2022 and said, Volodymyr, you can be the next Winston Churchill. We are going to give you everything we can. We are going to make it possible for you to defeat the dictator and free your people, on and on and on. And of course,
man, just to bolster your view here, talking about giving false hope. Here is the Chairman McCall, Republican representative. This is a couple of months back, but it's very relevant for what it is here, because he's also asking for long-range missiles and making it look like, it's not hard at all. Watch this.
This is a sanctuary zone that the Russians have created. And what they're doing is they're lining up all their artillery and rockets and missiles just across the Ukraine border that they then use to attack the Ukrainians. However, your administration and Jake Sullivan have restricted the arms use so that Ukraine cannot defend itself and fire back at Russia. That's why I mandated the ATACMS in the supplemental, the long range, short range, and the HIMARS, that your administration is tying their hands behind their back.
Okay, tying their hands behind their back, by the way, that's something that reporter said a minute ago. McCall says it here. You're going to hear somebody else say it in just a minute. It seems like there's some notes that are flowing around out there on the one hand, but let's look at the substance of what he said there. He's, again, making it look like, look, you're tying the hands behind the back. You're not even allowing them to strike these targets here, because if you did, it would make all the difference in the world. But I don't know if he's unaware or doesn't care that, by the way, Russia has extremely good air defense capabilities. There's a reason why the existing Ukraine Air Force wasn't able to do a lot of those things. And by the way, they have one, but they hardly ever use it because they get shot down. The missiles don't go in there. Nobody's stopping them from using their own stuff. In fact, they've been hitting apartment buildings in Saratov in southern Russia, in Moscow. They hit one the other day. They've been launching stuff all over. They hit, fuel facilities throughout Russia. So they are hitting stuff with their own deal. The issue is our stuff. But there's this belief that there's this magic bullet, magic bomb, magic missile, whatever you want to use, that if it's American or British or French, that somehow that will make a difference when the other ones aren't. But you see, from a military perspective, it doesn't make any difference, that they're still not going to get through in any large measure. But you have these people continuing to feed the hope of these other guys in Ukraine to keep prosecuting the war.
And I had a flashback to about 14, 15 months ago when I saw that, even longer, I guess, maybe half a year and a half ago, to your good friend Ben Hodges, on CNN and other places with a map kind of just like that. All we need to do is, all the Ukrainians need to do is punch through the line, and then they're going to be in the HIMARS are going to be able to cut the and they use this god awful term, the land bridge, the road between that links Crimea to mainland Russia. Right. I mean, and then the war is going to be over. They won't be able to reinforce their forces, et cetera, et cetera. That's all we need to do. Just look at this map. It's so simple. All we got to do is move this little piece to here, and bing, bang, boom, the war is over. Like I did this playing Axis and Allies when I was a kid, or something like that. Right. I mean, so it really, it just shows what we're, and what it comes back to is the idea of how do they keep this war going? How do they continue this war? And so they put these things up there and they give this false hope. And for people who may not understand these types of things, it sounds good. Sounds like they got a plan. Oh, and it ties into this idea of tying the hands behind their back, this idea of stabbing in the back, this idea of betrayal. That's something that's really getting pushed in Washington, D.C. right now against the White House. And to Joe Biden's credit, he, at least this week, stood up against it and didn't authorize these strikes into Russia.
Yeah, but all he did is say, well, we're still taking it under advisement, maybe next week. So
that's, I mean,
and that's not out of the danger zone.
Yeah. Was that delay? Is this just a delay to get the messaging synchronized so that it links up with Zelensky's victory announcement? So when he shows up hand in glove, we're announcing this as he's giving us the step-by-step process that they're going to win the war. The other thing too is nothing stopping McCall and others in the House, as well as those in the Senate, like Graham and Blumenthal, from attaching a resolution or even an authorization in the continuing resolution to allow for these by U.S. law. I mean, is that the play that's going to happen next? I don't know. I mean, but you could speculate how either Biden is in on it and he's willing to just delay this to make the plan better, make the messaging better, or there's going to be a fight over this and he's going to be under intense political pressure, and what's going to be hammered over and over again on CNN and MSNBC and the Washington Post is Biden losing his legacy. Is this going to be Biden's legacy, the man who lost Ukraine, right? And so for someone like him who is so tied up in his identity and who he is, his place in history, that may be a very powerful thing. But
okay,
I think
so that brings up another point here, because there's a potential problem with that issue about wanting to be able to concerned about your legacy, not wanting to be the one to lost the war, because you're coming up to a point where you can only spin things so long. Like in Afghanistan, they spun that stuff for a long time until August 2021, when you couldn't spin it anymore, and all of a sudden reality imposes itself. We're moving towards a similar place on that right now, even in the near term here with this, because Zelensky's going to come to town in a week and he's going to announce this victory plan. So if you don't give him the long range missiles, then it's going to look like you tied his hands, but you tied his hands behind his back. But now here's Zelensky talking about why he wants these missiles, which is also irrational. Now, explain how this works together to me, that we want to have a negotiated settlement and I want the missiles. And here's what I want the missiles to do. Actually, watch this one.
When you're very strong and the other side knows that you're very strong and you're as strong as possible to make influence on his society, not to be very happy with this war, because he afraid, again, I repeat it again and again, because I'm sure in it, he afraid only one thing: no leaders, no countries, no nothing. He afraid of his society, Russian people. And if Russian people are in danger, if they don't have comfortable life, if they live without energy like our people, they will understand the price of the war, and they will be not happy with it, and they will begin to influence on him, on Putin. That's why I said, make Ukraine strong, and you will see that he will sit and negotiate.
I don't know that anyone in the Biden administration, to include himself, believes that that the Russian people, he described it, Zelensky did, the American people. We like our comfort. And if you get us uncomfortable, we may do something. But the Russian people are used to suffering. And by the way, they view all of us as being against them. So it's them against the world. So there is nobody in Russia that's saying because of where the war has come to us, we're going to negotiate. To the contrary, what I have seen a lot in the Russian media is that they're angry at Putin for not going faster and harder, and they want him to do more. So these missiles are not going to have that result. So the question is, if Biden has any understanding of that dynamic, is he willing to give those missiles and they won't have the impact that it would, and it could actually cause we haven't talked about it much yet, but we did mention it, a really strong reaction from the Russian side, or does he not give them and then he gets blamed if it doesn't work, which it won't already? So you see Biden's in a real tough spot. How can he navigate this?
Yeah, I mean, first, let's go back to this assertion that all you got to do is put pain on these other people and they're going to give up, particularly through airstrikes. And that's just so ahistorical. I mean, that is just, it's something that just comes up over and over again within the American empire, and it's war making, and it's, particularly those who are selling. If people didn't see this, I don't know if folks saw this, that the new cost data came out for the F-35. Did you see this, Danny?
I did not.
Yeah, so the new cost data came out for the F-35. The program is going to be over $2 trillion now, and we're going to buy 2,400 of those planes. We've bought about 600 already, so we're going to buy 1,800 more. When you just do that simple math, it comes out that each plane is going to cost $197 million, and they're going to cost more than $620 million per plane to operate and maintain over their lifetimes. Right. So you have to have this idea that air power is essential. This is how you win wars. And the idea you're going to bomb your enemy into submission. Well, you know what? Go ask the Vietnamese about that. Go ask the Yemenis about that. Go ask the Southern Afghans. Azmat Khan, the great
Ukrainians about it. I just showed you. He's talking about all these bombs that they get every day. And has it caused them to back down?
Right. Exactly. So it's just, but it sounds good, doesn't it? Oh yeah, and then the idea that the Russians are going to be the ones that are going to back down. If I'm not mistaken, Vladimir Putin's family survived the siege of Leningrad. You don't grow up in a family like that and just say, "Oh, you know what? Things are getting a little tough now. We're uncomfortable."
Quit.
Quit. I mean, so the nonsense of all of this is just extraordinary. But it's incredibly specious. It sounds good, even though it's complete nonsense. And it gets put over and over again. And I guarantee you, if you turn on, particularly next week, if you turn on CNN or Fox or anything like that, or the Post, you're going to have this type of commentary that, this is a way you can win the wars by putting the hurt on the Russian people. Now, I think that the Russians will be happy to negotiate if they get what they want, because they don't want to take over all of Ukraine. They originally didn't even want to take these 4 oblasts. They just, you read what Anatol Levin has written about this. A lot of the Russians he's talked to said, we don't want to keep our troops in those oblasts. And we're not really even sure, we don't really want to annex them. We just want this to be an autonomous zone, a buffer zone for us, but also a safe zone for Russian people in that area, and we could live with pulling our troops out if we get that demilitarization neutrality agreement with Ukraine. I mean, so they've been consistent in what they've been saying for years, so you asked me something about Biden. I got on this tangent and I kind of lost track of that, but this the foolishness here, and it's so informed by the greed, right? By the megalomania and the greed. So there is a letter put out by a number of retired generals and admirals, as well as diplomats, Breedlove, Hodges, Brzezinski, others. And their thing basically was like, right. Yeah. And then you basically have to give, President Biden give these longer range missiles to Ukraine. And their argument about the Russians will not react is because they haven't reacted yet, which is just this incredibly fallacious, incredibly stupid argument. But that gets quoted in the New York Times. So last week, when the New York Times was reporting on this debate over or this discussion and how Keir Starmer is coming over to the U.S. to talk to Joe Biden directly about this big, very, very high profile visit. And this is the main issue, these missiles. They're quoting these guys, these retired admirals and generals, all of whom work for the defense industry in some capacity. If I had more time, I would go through that list and then search all the different boards of directors and find out which ones all these guys are on, just to kind of prove a point to myself, I guess. But, this idea that somehow, this is what gets quoted when, first of all, these guys have been incorrect time and time and time again, not minorly incorrect, egregiously incorrect.
Right.
But then also too, the logic of it, just because somebody hasn't responded in the way that you say they would, based upon your conception of what their red lines are. The Russians have never said the red line for us is anything that's been done before. They've cautioned on it, and they've made clear what their red lines are. And I think they're making it clear now in a sense of direct NATO involvement is a red line. And when you start talking about using these missiles because of the requirement for the support to fire these missiles, whether it's the satellites or the programming, the targeting, et cetera, that's direct NATO involvement. So that's like the red line that's there. All these other things that they attest to as being red lines, these experts attest to as being red lines, I don't know if the Russians have ever said that or not.
Yeah. That's not. But here's one thing. I'm glad you brought that letter, because there were so many, at least on paper, guys who have great credibility. 4-star generals, 3-star generals in charge of, NATO commander with Wes Clark, for example, Breedlove, a lot of high-ranking people here. Why would you want to recommend that the president of the United States open that spigot up when, Gary, if you can bring that New York Times piece up, our Secretary of State of Defense has said, hey, man, hold on, because we ain't got a lot of them ourselves. This is an excerpt from this New York Times piece. It says, Mr. Austin continues to believe that the use of U.S. weapons for long-range strikes won't turn the tide of the war, in part because there are not enough ATACMS or British or French missiles to sustain an attack. And then he goes on to say that American officials are concerned they could not supply enough of those missiles to seriously damage a wide range of Russian targets. And listen, militarily speaking, if you're going to try and take out that map that McCall was showing about, where all these Russian bases are, it's a long-range bombing campaign. It's not a strike. It's a campaign, which means you have to have months worth of missiles and relentlessly continue to bomb like the Russians are doing. They have a campaign where they've been doing this since at least October of 2022, and they're still doing it to this day, and it hasn't been decisive so far. But we don't have the missiles to do that. So why, Matt, seriously, tell me why all these generals can't do math or something, that they are advocating that the president, the commander-in-chief, take a course of action that we can't support.
It gets back to individual and institutional greed. These guys are megalomaniacs. They believe in their own purpose in life, their own legacies. Certainly, they're also too. They have employers now. They're all employed by the defense industry, and it's also to who they are. It's what they are. They believe. They are true believers. Look, the empire doesn't promote people to those 3- and 4-star level positions unless they are true believers, right? So I shouldn't even assign this idea of the pettiness of it, the money, or anything like that, because these people really do believe in the American empire, they believe
fair enough. They believe in the empire, but Matt, if you don't have the missiles. Right. Why would you want to go down a path that won't work?
Right. And then the other point too, like you're kind of getting at, the Russians have been preparing this for years. Look at our success, say, in the Red Sea. The Navy was running around telling everybody, hey, we are in the largest naval battle since World War II. Look at us. We are, whoever the commander is down there, right? I'm the second coming of Chester Nimitz. I guess technically it is the largest naval battle since World War II. It's also the largest naval defeat for the United States Navy since World War II. And that has been,
they forgot that part.
8 months of sustained air campaign against Ansar Allah, Houthi, Yemeni targets, and they've not been able to do anything to achieve their mission of opening back up the Red Sea. Why do you think then, if you can't do that in Yemen, a country that was systematically degraded and destroyed by 8 years of Saudi and UAE bombardment and blockade, you're going to do what against the Russian military? Right. When you've been telegraphing this for how long? The other thing too, just to go back to something I said before about, all these weapon systems, why aren't we giving them? One of the things that people may not know is that when we authorized the ATACMS back in January, and their first use is really, I think that we see is in April, which of course, if people remember, one of the first uses of the ATACMS in Crimea hit the missile hit a beach and killed a kid, right? Like fantastic. That's really great. But the ATACMS, one of the reasons why I think the reason why we start giving them to in December is because that's when the ATACMS replacement, the PRISM missile starts showing up. And for people who are interested in the finance and the math and the military industrial complex angle of this, ATACMS costs $1 million, and we're replacing it with a PRISM missile that costs $2.5 million, right? So there's that very basic thing that's always there. But we don't start giving them ATACMS until we start having ATACMS replacements come into the inventory. So I don't even know how many we're actually making, because they're probably no longer under contract. So all we can give them is what we have in our inventory as they're replaced by these, precision strike missiles or whatever they're calling them, right? So like it just also shows just fundamentally how mendacious this whole policy is. As if they're actually really thinking about it, and we don't even have the missiles to give you, just as you said. So how can you launch this campaign? Again, all these factors, the Russians are prepared. You don't have enough missiles. Historically, it tells you it's not going to work, on and on and on. So how do these people, but this is how they got to be 3 and 4-star generals, is because they were willing to go along with it and lie about it and promote it because it was in the best interest of the institution. And so then it's in the best interest of themselves. This is what these people know. This is who they are.
Okay, so let's circle back around to my question a few minutes ago with that information here, and I won't take the time right now, but the front on the Eastern Front continues to crumble. The human losses are just staggering for the Ukraine side. Now then, the advance into the northern part in the Kursk region is also starting to collapse. They're not making advances anymore there. Bottom line is that they're losing everywhere on the tactical and even strategic level. Let's get back to Biden now. So he has to decide, if I give them the missiles, we have some, so they can give them some, and they'll have a strike or so, or they'll have some impact, but it's not going to change the outcome of the war. But it may draw Russia in. It may cause them, and I've seen some people in the Russian side actually say that if you do that, because Putin has not laid the groundwork in this, that this will be a direct intervention into the war by you, because you have to help these things land on Russian targets, that we will then strike, apparently conventionally at first anyway, targets on NATO territory, which could explode Article 5, and God only help us at that point. Does he do that, or does he say no and then take the heat on the public relations issue you mentioned, where then he's going to be blamed for, quote, losing Ukraine? You see, he's in a real tough bind there. How do you see him playing this out in the coming just couple of weeks?
Yeah, if he says no, he has the opportunity for decades from now for us to look back and point to him as a great president then, right? He said no. He realized there was a red line. He said no.
In 10 years from now, but not
right.
now and
not right now. No, right now he's in this, and this is a terribly difficult political situation, because you've got this campaign going on. It's incredibly close. Things are happening that are incredibly emotional and dramatic. You just had this guy who connected to the Ukrainians tried to kill President Trump on the golf course. So it's not even just like the broader, it's specific to Ukraine, the drama of the presidential race. And you've got this lame duck president that we don't even know how much he's being the president. How much is Jake Sullivan the president of the United States right now? Like, we just don't know.
It's embarrassing you say Jake Sullivan as opposed to Kamala Harris. I just thought I'd put that out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly the case. But yeah, he's in a very difficult position politically. I think for us and those watching and listening, the answer is pretty simple. But the pressure he's under, this idea, you're going to betray them. You're going to be the one who lost Ukraine. And when you had the chance to stand up to a dictator, you chose not to. The pathway was all there. What you said about Zelensky coming and offering even you can see what's really important to me is the Brits and how the Brits handled all this, where they have their storm shadows and they say, you know what, Ukraine, you can use our storm shadows as you want. as long as the Americans say yes. This is essentially a dad saying to his kids, yeah, as long as your mom says it's okay, right? It's completely removing yourself of accountability, acknowledging who actually really is in charge here. I mean, like, so you see what the Brits, the way they punted that.
And by the way, we have Alexander Mercouris on to talk about that exact part of this equation just this afternoon at 3 p.m.
Yeah, terrific.
So I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah, you're not going to want to miss that one, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. He's a guy I learn a lot from every week. I mean, but this is a difficult position for the president politically.
So what do you think he's going to do?
I don't know. I mean, I'm afraid that he is going to bend to that pressure. He's going to line up with the victory plan, that this delay was just to keep the messaging synchronized, and that they're going to launch these strikes, and they're going to hope that it doesn't get out of hand. Or they're going to say, if it gets out of hand, it won't happen until after we're out of office, right? Or possibly there's a more maniacal thing. It's like, this way we are now really locking the United States into this war. There's a danger. There's not a danger that Harris is going to end this war. There's a danger that Republicans might end this war. And we saw, though, there's a split within the Republican Party, and Donald Trump is in the minority of that, right? I mean, when the $61 billion for Ukraine came up back in April, a majority of Republicans in the House and Senate voted for it. I mean, so there's going to be this fight within the Republican Party over it. So is this a way to lock the United States into Ukraine to as they call it, Trump-proof it, to keep us by escalating it this way? And you're right. I mean, the danger is that the Russians likely will respond first with conventional weapons. The United States and NATO then reply with the deep strike weapons against Russian command and control facilities. Well, some of those command and control facilities are incredibly important to the existential state of Russia. And this is where it goes nuclear. Because if you strike the wrong command and control facility, and the Russians are now concerned that they've lost the ability to defend themselves from a nuclear attack, they may very well launch their nuclear forces.
And
right?
Listen, they continue to make that. I mean, it's Ryabkov here recently, certainly Putin himself multiple times, but as recently as last Friday, Lavrov also over the last weekend or so, specifically mentioning the nuclear adjustments we've been doing to our doctrine, our employment doctrine. I mean, these are as clear as you can be. He specifically told the United States, Lavrov, to my knowledge, the first time he's ever been this explicit. This is less than a week ago, that America, don't think that this is only going to happen on European soil. If it happens, don't think that your oceans are going to save you. They won't. I mean, you can't get any more clear than that. And I do think that Biden, for all of his rhetoric and stuff, doesn't want to get us into one of these kind of conflicts here. So my hope is that when it comes to, forgive the pun or words here, nut cutting time, that he's going to say, we're not going to go down this path, because you want to be, if you had to face the issue of being embarrassed because you, quote, lost Ukraine, or be the president that got us into a nuclear war, I'm thinking you'd want to go with this one. Let's just hope that that happens.
Yeah, I mean, but when you look at the Ukraine polling numbers, Israel and Palestine, completely the opposite. There are a majority of Americans who, depending on how the question's asked, it's a narrow majority or it's a plurality, who still support the Ukraine war. When you look at Democrats, you start getting into about the 60% range who still think the Ukraine war is a good idea. You have a majority of Democrats, when asked if the Ukraine war, if being involved in the Ukraine war risks a war between the United States and Russia, they agree with that. They think it's okay. A majority of Democrats are in line with that. This Ukraine war for the Democrats, for the loyalists of the Democratic Party, is a key identity issue. This is nothing more than an extension of Russiangate. This is nothing more than what was put forth and propagated in 2016 as to explain for the reason why Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump. That was because the Russians, rigged the elections. I mean, this is what we have seen, and they have run on this for almost a decade. And this is as deep of a commitment within loyalist Democrats as anything. I would dare say maybe their most sincere commitment. If you remember, you go back a year when the Biden campaign launches its first presidential ad, it is of Joe Biden visiting Kyiv, right? So you can see this. This is what they chose to lead with. They chose to lead with this, wartime president defending democracy. Oh, Putin, Trump, right? A, B, C kind of thing, right? I mean, that's what their loyalists really believe. So I'm afraid that It's that type of political calculation, the same calculation that why is the Harris campaign continuing to support Israel when it's clear that they will actually gain votes in November, not just by pushing for a ceasefire, and I mean actually pushing for a ceasefire, not just the lip service they pay to it, but actually too, they will gain votes. This just came out in a poll done by the Cato Institute last week. They will gain votes if they condition or block weapons to Israel. They will actually gain votes on that in the 3 key swing states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And they're not doing it because they're more beholden. They'd rather stay in the good graces of AIPAC and the pro-Israel lobby than actually win the election in November. I mean, so that's the politics of all this. But then there's also too the mania. And you go back, when was that story, Gary, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, David Sanger in the New York Times talking about how the United States has changed its nuclear war policy. We now have a policy where we're going to be able to fight 3 nuclear wars simultaneously, right? God help us. But first of all, those people believe that's possible. But also in that article, which is really important, it says that the White House in 2022 estimated the risk of nuclear war in Ukraine at 50-50, and they still pushed on. So if you're to believe these people, right, if you're to believe David Sanger and what they told him, they were saying, the odds of it going nuclear in 2022 are 50-50, but we kept doubling down.
Good point. Wow.
Right? I mean, so we are strapped into this car while these madmen play chicken, and they think they are masters of the universe. They think they're the ones who create history, and reality bends to them. And then they're up against people who aren't blinking, right? People who have said before, if you do this in Georgia, we will do this. If you do this in Syria, we'll do this. If you do this in Ukraine, we'll do this. So, yeah, I mean, we're in a very dangerous place.
We truly are. And I'm even less optimistic now than I was before we started talking. So thanks for that. But we always want the truth on this. And listen, like I mentioned here this afternoon at 3 o'clock, we're going to get the European side of this, where we're going to have Alexander Mercurius on. It's going to give us a lot of interesting insight into what the UK side is looking at this. Fascinating stuff. He and I have been talking offline already, and you're not going to want to miss that one. So please do tune in at 3 o'clock this afternoon for Alexander Mercurius. And Matt, as always, thanks so much for coming on today. We always really appreciate this stuff. And whether the advice is something I want to hear or not, we love to hear it because, like you said, I think your imagery there, we're strapped into this car driven by a madman, is unfortunately very apropos. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Denny.
And I also want to remind you that because I know a lot of people can't watch all of our shows here, but they can listen to them. And anywhere you get your podcast, really, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Podcast Addict, several other places too. Just almost any place. You just have to type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Make sure you type in the whole word there, and you can find us wherever you get your podcast, so we can help spread the word so the truth can get out there instead of this insanity that we keep saying on a lot of the major media. Be part of the solution here. Get this information out. And we will see you this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.